So it's funny lately, like I was just telling you, right? Like it's normal too, like on the human side of how do I say, like when you're becoming that leader or you're becoming that father, you're becoming that version of what you're trying to become. It's normal too to also have, I wouldn't say setbacks, but that roller coaster, right? Because you get all these highs and then you want more of that. And then you also get some setbacks and then more highs, right? So that also comes with it too, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, man. Yeah, the highs are highs and the setbacks for sure, and the potential for setback, which I think ultimately is one of the main hurdles or the main pull on the reins when somebody wants to start something. In my case, you know, if I'm dealing with somebody that wants to get fit, right? They're like, I might fail. And in business as well, it's like, I'll probably fail. And there's an ego thing that's there. So welcome to the podcast, Ben. It's always a pleasure. We haven't chatted. We haven't chatted enough in the last few weeks. I mean, I think during COVID, we hit our peak conversation level. We were going for runs, and then as always, you know, there's life that starts to happen. So everything is in ebbs and flows. So cool to get you on the podcast, chat about your podcast, chat about what you're up to, and you're a young gun kicking ass and taking names. So welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the welcome. Super amped up to be here. And yeah, definitely, you know, it's been a while since we last chatted, but I always feel whenever we do chat, it always feels like yesterday, which is probably a little cheesy, but definitely
that's very
definitely
sweet of
accurate.
you. That's very sweet of you to say.
But no, it's good to be here. And I think you know, so much happens in 1 year, and we sometimes forget that. So we could dive more into that in like a little bit. Yeah, for sure.
Right on. So you are not only young, like I mentioned before, but you're a podcaster. You have the Living Your Greatness podcast. You also have a blog on Medium. You're a teacher. And what else you got going on, man? That's a lot of stuff for the tender age. Are you even 30 yet? You're in your mid 20s. Like, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, no, I just turned 29 actually a couple of weeks ago. And
30 is just on the horizon.
I know, it's getting close. It's a scary thought, right? But yeah, no, I think you nailed it to the T. Yeah, no, I started the Living Your Greatness podcast about a year and 4 years ago. So I've been doing a lot of pods, currently have 74. So if anyone want to check that out, they could check it there. And then, yeah, I've done a lot of writing on Medium. I started there just to get started and kind of get going. Now I'm in that process of, you know, transitioning everything over to my website. And yeah, and then you kind of nailed it. Like I haven't only been, you know, a teacher, you know, where I teach physical education at a college level, but I think throughout my life, I've always been motivated about health and wellness and doing that in different domains of how to motivate people. So not only in the education setting, but also in the personal training world, as well as like lifeguarding world. And then as well as like a leadership, you know, throughout my life, whether that's on a sports team, or a coach. So kind of playing different roles.
Right on. Yeah. I mean, to give the listeners a bit of context. So your family, I knew your brother because we were in the same grade way back in like elementary and high school days, your eldest brother. And then the rest of your family I knew through church and through school. And I guess you weren't even, no, it's impossible because I wasn't literally your teacher, but I was at BHS when you were graduating in grade 11. That was my first year actually teaching out of teachers college. So to, I guess, date myself a little bit, that was what, 2008, 2009, I think.
That actually would have been, I think when I was in grade 10, yeah, you were there, but it would have been in grade 11, I think, more when you were there more often. I think you picked up a teaching role. And so that would have been 2010. Yeah. That was the year I graduated.
2020. Yeah. That makes sense. Cause it was right before I deployed to Afghanistan. So yeah, I was, it's still in my young teaching days. And, yeah, it was cool to go from like that transition, because I hadn't seen you obviously for a while, and then you're basically like a young man, and you had the chance to carry the torch for the Olympics. That was
Yeah.
really cool. And then, gap of time, and then popped up on each other's radars about 3 years ago. And you had this idea, like you wanted to start this podcast, Living Your Greatness podcast. And I was, like you're well in, man. You got 74 episodes. Like you're well past that. Like this is just a fleeting hobby. I think I'll try it out and then we'll see how it goes. Like this is something you do now, and you're, consistently pumping out episodes. Why did you decide, was it 3 years ago? Like, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. Like it's not something that most guys, I don't think, maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but in their like mid-20s decide, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast on, I believe it's, having a better mindset, getting yourself dialed in, and just like living a better life based on the title of your podcast, right? And the type of guests you have on. What was your motivation to get that up and started?
Yeah, well, I think the motivation doesn't just start randomly. I think it's been there for a while. I still remember, actually, it's funny that you brought up like the high school days in my last years there when I carried like the Olympic torch. And speaking of like the Olympics, and if we think about an athlete, right, how to get there. And already around that time, I was like, wow, I know some people through family or friends that are an Olympian, but it's obviously like they work hard, they have good habits, they have good routines. But I was like, a lot of these people are people like me, like I know them, I know where they grew up, they're from my neighborhood. And so I was always curious and motivated, like how to break down how someone got there. But especially when I saw a lot of people that I knew that were already there. So I would say that was kind of a stepping stone when I was a high level athlete, like even like myself. I was like, oh, there's nothing really special about me. I just have good habits and kind of routines. And then shortly after that, I think it would have been maybe 2011, 2012. I started listening to Tim Ferriss because I had read his first book and I loved what he was doing. I still remember his episode 1 and 2, about becoming faster and stronger and having world-class performers on. So that was actually the time, a long time ago, when I actually wanted to start a podcast. But at the time, kind of like you said, sometimes life could get away, or maybe it's not that we're not ready to start. But there's other maybe commitments that you're given to at that time of your life. So around that time, I was, completing like my CJEP degree and then transitioning to university. Right. So, it's not that I wasn't ready to do it. I just got distracted with other commitments of kind of leadership. And if I look back, a lot of those experiences that I did before starting it a year and a half ago have led to the leader that I'm being still today. You know what I mean? So whether that was through sport, right, being a captain on a high level water polo team, or whether that was then, managing like a summer pool and, leading a team, those were all things that were kind of big commitments and kind of leadership experiences, as well as through McGill, planning orientation week for Frosh. And right. So these were all chapters and experiences, I think, of my life, of like the leadership that I was becoming. And then eventually, kind of like you said, like, it becomes hard, like when you're first thinking of that idea, because you're like, oh, like I'm just like an average dude, I have 2 legs, 2 arms, all that stuff. But I think it was becoming more clear when I started writing that I wanted to have a greater impact. So not just through, being a captain on a team, not just through, like my work and my profession. I just felt that, when I look at other people that I knew in my life, for example, when I was in university, I had a roommate, right, who ended up becoming, a top world-class CrossFitter, right? And so when I looked at all these experiences, I'm like, I want to inspire people, to create a better version of themselves, by enhancing their overall health and kind of wellness, right? So that's kind of like been like the journey, but it all kind of got inspired, I think, from when I had originally listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast, the first couple episodes. I was inspired to bring this one day.
I'm always intrigued by individuals that, because a lot of people read or listen to things, but then never take action. And that's kind of the message I want to convey. Like, you come from an athletics background, you played, or you, how do you say that? You played water polo, you swam water polo. I guess you played water polo.
Competed.
You competed in water polo. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you competed in high level water polo. So you have that background of, being committed to get to that level in and of itself is difficult. But like you said, you never really thought of it as anything special. But in reality, anybody that makes it to high level anything had to commit a substantial amount of time and make a substantial amount of sacrifices. So you've got that. Cool. And then you decided, well, there must be a little bit more. And why is it, like, you asked that question of yourself, why is it that I'm able to get here? And you started reading things, and Tim Ferriss was one of those things. And coincidentally enough, same here. And it seems like that's like a general through line with the other individuals that I like listening to. They've listened to Tim Ferriss. Like, I was just literally listening to Andrew Huberman, who I don't know if you're familiar with Huberman Labs. And he was talking about Tim Ferriss and how that book kind of, changed his life as well. And just that one individual, because he decided, hey, you know what, I'm just going to put my thought process out to the universe and create like the 4-hour work week as a test to see if this is something that people will actually like cling on to. He just hit something, like he knocked it out of the park. And it was just an amazing, for me, eye opener as well, because it just made me think differently. Now, I do not do a 4-hour work week. I do a much longer work week, but it allowed me to start realizing that what I was doing in teaching wasn't what I wanted to do, because I wasn't applying myself in the things that I saw myself doing, for the next 20, 30, 40 years. I didn't feel like I was providing that much value into the universe. And I think that was the biggest takeaway from 4-hour work week, is like, you want to be doing stuff, because he mentioned in his book, like, he felt like a prisoner in his own business. Like, he hated it, even though he created it himself. Like, you don't want to be in that. You don't want to be super productive, and then at the end of the day, like, hate your life. Like, that's like the worst possible scenario. So, you seem to be surrounded by those people, right? Like, and you're constantly attracting that like high performance type mindset. What do you feel is kind of like, do you feel like there's a driving force, or do you feel like it's a compounding effect where, you read one thing and you're like, oh, I want to learn more. Oh, that's cool. Where does that go? Like, did you always have this kind of like vein of curiosity that kept you motivated? Or is it just something that, in the last 10 years or so has just been something that kind of intrigued you? Like, was there something really that has been driving you from the start to like seek out new ideas, new concepts, and convey them out to the, your friends and to the masses with your podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is, and I think you knocked it out of the park there with curiosity, right? So I think as a person, when we know our personal traits, right, I'm adventurous, right? I love travel. I'm someone who's very curious. I'm a continuous learner, right? So when you know yourself already well of who you are, I think I've always been that way, right? But I think as you mature in life, or, you start reading more, or, on a daily basis, and discovering new knowledge and wisdom and information, or listening to podcasts, right? Like, there's many ways, to get knowledge, right? You could also get it through, making a lot of mistakes, right? Like your own mistakes and kind of life's
Amen.
Successes and failures, right? So I think I was always curious, even when I was becoming a leader, or in many different domains in my life, whether that's in family, whether that's in friendships, whether that's on sports teams, kind of like I was saying. So I think once you have that mindset, which I believe is more of like a growth mindset, you kind of carry that with you all the time, every day, every minute. Again, like, you're human, right? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to be feeling off some days. Like, that's all, part of a great leader, right? I would say curiosity has always been there. And then I think the more you follow like things that you're passionate about, right? So for myself, like, I do enjoy my main professions that I've done like the last couple of years, and even currently now. if I was to be honest. But I've always felt like I could give more, back to others, whether it's wisdom I've done through one-on-one conversations with friends, or whether it is, with family, or whether it is with people that are just out there. And I find the other thing is when your why is so strong of what you're doing, it makes it really easier. Like I look at I want to continue to grow, and kind of plant my tree, and keep growing. Right. And, for me, like, I don't want to be just selfish. Like I also want to share that with family, with friends. And so I do that obviously through podcasting. I do that through writing. Right. So you got to do it first for yourself for the right reasons of why you're doing it. And then I think, there's nothing better than to share that, right? To share that knowledge or to share that growth. Right.
Mm-hmm. I think we've had a few conversations about like Gary V and the idea of like jab, counter punch, and just consistently putting out like your story, like you're documenting, you're chronicling what's going on. Because, we're kind of at the same stage, right? We don't have a massive following, but yet we still decide to publish new content, new blogs, new podcasts. And to see the consistency is really cool. And I think a lot of individuals, well, at least, I mean, it's usually proven out in the market, they give up within, a year or two because they don't automatically get a massive following. They don't automatically say, like, just because you're putting out content that's actually quite good, you automatically get like a major deal. Like it's not a reality. And like Gary V has said a few times, right? It's, he's like a 20-year overnight success. Like he's been grinding for a long time to get to where he's at. So what keeps you motivated? Like you mentioned your why. You're at episode 74. I think you've got a bunch of Medium articles as well. Like, and you're consistently putting out new ideas, new content. And like, obviously you don't have a massive following. So what is that motivation that's intrinsically keeping you going forward? Because the reason why I wanted to have you on is because like, I can see the progress. I'm like, man, you're going to pop eventually. It's going to be really cool. And I want to make sure like I get your thought process before it turns into something where it's like, Dave, sorry, man, you got to go through my freaking secretary. Like, there's no way that we're going to get it done, like, so what is it? Like, what is your intrinsic motivation to keep it going, and your big why?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, if you ever start anything, you got to do it for the right reasons, right? So I think the first thing is, if you're doing it because of the following, if you're doing it because of the fame, if you're doing it because of the money, that's not the reason why you start something. Now, don't get me wrong, that you still have to have that business mindset. You still have to have that entrepreneur mindset, all that stuff. But the biggest thing is, what are you trying to do? What is your impact? What is like the value that you're creating for yourself and others, and that community that you're trying to build? And so, you start off there with a really good example, right? By talking about Gary V and his whole process, right? But he's one example of kind of many, right? If you look at James Clear, who is one of the, top best-selling authors in the world, I talk about him a lot on my podcast. You got to start first with, what are your values and what are you trying to become, right? And so like, I know for me, like some of my values, I'm community driven, right? So I'm getting that right now through the running communities that I lead. I'm getting that right now through the podcast that I'm building, right? So first, I think you need to know like your set of values of what you believe in. And then you also have to connect that to your mission or to your vision of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. And I think as you start to put in the work, as you start to be consistent, you get a lot of fulfillment, A, for yourself, because you're actually learning a lot, but B, even to, like your wolf pack, I guess, is kind of following you and is growing, but that's not why you started it. That's not why you did it. That will come. And I'm a big believer, like, fire catches fire, right? So over time, if you are consistent, I really believe that people will, it takes one conversation where someone gets inspired, right? But I think the biggest thing right now, I feel like I'm dodging a bit your question. I think the biggest thing to kind of answer it is like, people are very impatient. And so they want to just overnight, for example, get a 6-pack in fitness. They want overnight, that stock that they chose in finance for it to go up, 1,000-fold, right? They want, if they're starting as a writer or a podcaster, to go from 1 to 1,000 right away. And that's why they say, after usually 7 episodes, they usually say that most podcasters quit after 7 episodes, right? So all this being said is, it's not about, you can't look at the results right away. You got to look at, again, like, what are your values? Who are you trying to become? What is the community that you're trying to create? And know that with time, the question is not if, the question is when. So with time that you will succeed, success always happens over many failures and many successes. And I think the biggest thing that I would say, just like to end off this part, is like if I look back, at these 74 episodes, that's awesome. The consistency, all that stuff. But with every guest, there's been different reactions from people across the world. Right. And sometimes you'll have a guest, that comes on your show that's very well known, and all of a sudden, boom, you have 100 new followers. So there's always moments, small little breakouts that I think you have to appreciate, and just keep driving every day, keep being yourself, keep following your values, keep consistency, keep doing it for the right reasons. And it's just a matter of time. So I'll just end off again. It's not a question of if, the question is when.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's applicable. Like you said, the concept of, immediate gratification is something that we're kind of, it's ingrained in us now, right? We get immediate, products sent to our house, immediate food, immediate everything, right? Like Netflix, it's all now. So you get conditioned for now. And then when you try to provide value, or you try to create something that is intended to have value, you're kind of already conditioned to expect, well, why aren't I famous yet? Why don't I have 100,000 followers on Instagram? Why aren't people banging down my door to buy my service or buy my program or buy? It's because you haven't put in the reps, man. The reps take a long time. Whether it's fitness, whether it's a business, it doesn't matter. So yeah, I echo you big time on what you're talking about there. So I wanted to chat about some of the guests you've had on the podcast.
Dave, yes, there's something that I want to add too. There's a tweet that I posted maybe, I think, a month ago or something, and it was, you want to be impatient with your actions, but you want to be patient with your results, right? Because it does take time. It's that journey of, like you said, putting in the reps and all that stuff. And if you look at some of the top people that we were talking about right now, like Tim Ferriss, Gary Vee, Ryan Holiday as a writer, the list goes on. If you look at the first couple blogs that they ever wrote, that was 15 years ago, right? 20 years ago for some of them. So it's just a matter of time, right? So again, that kind of goes to what I was ending off with the question is when, not if. But again, you want to be doing it for the right reasons. And if I can end off on one other note to kind of connect to that idea is, we just spoke about fitness, how do you keep it sustainable, right? And it's, to choose things that you also enjoy doing. So if you're active consistently, if you're doing things that you like to do, there's most likely that you're going to keep in with the process and enjoy the process. And it's just a matter of time that, as you keep making little enhancements of improvement, like nutrition, sleep, right? The list goes on, you're then going to get your results, right? So be impatient with your action, but in terms of your result, be patient with your result, because everything takes time.
I like that you mentioned Ryan Holiday. You're the one that introduced me to him, actually. It was in when I had my office there in Point Claire. You're like, yeah, you should check this guy out. I'm like, oh, okay. I know I hadn't. My first intro to Stoic philosophy was another guest I had on the podcast. He was a former member of my unit as well. And he was talking about Stoic philosophy and memento mori. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I was like, I've heard about, everybody kind of knows about, oh, you're being such a Stoic, and I understood like back then, my understanding of Stoicism was, oh, you're emotionless, right? You're Spock. And I was like, all right, cool. Maybe I'll look into it a little more. So I started like looking up like Ron Holiday stuff, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then you're like, no, you need to read his blog. You should read his book. I was like, all right, check. I guess I will. And it was awesome, man. Thanks for pointing me in that direction. Yeah, because his book was awesome. And he, like you said, started out very humbly, but he had a very focused direction of where he wanted to go. Basically, he wants to, like I saw him on Rogan too. It was great to listen to him in long form conversation. He just found this stuff really cool. Like he found Stoic philosophy really cool. And at the right moment in time, when I guess as a society or civilization here in the West, we're rediscovering these ancient philosophies because they're very relevant to our current time, even though it was over 2,000 years ago that these ideas were being talked about and generated. And they were even older than that because they came from the ancient Greeks. Like it's fascinating to see the carryover through time, because I believe they're just human truths. And so he just became an expert. He just put in the work, and then he's able to convey it in his books and in his blogs and his podcasts. And it was just right person, right time, right message. And it's really cool that it just kind of it takes over. So just to echo what you were saying there, like, yeah, you put the time in, and eventually your time comes. So very cool. So thank you. Thank you for pointing me in the way of the Stoics. Appreciate it. I wanted to touch base on some of the guests you've had. So you have a trend that I've noticed. There's stuff on mindset, and then there's also stuff on investment. So you've had some really interesting guests on investment, and one of them that stands out is Daniela Camboni, because I listened to her because she's part of the Stands Bridge investment.
Stansberry Research.
Yeah. Stansberry, that's it. Stansberry Research, which I always catch on YouTube, because you always have really interesting guests on, like really interesting guests that I want to hear their opinions, because I'm a neophyte in the investment space. So if I can get 20 minutes of an expert talking about like the next 5 years, the current market situation, where to put my money, what assets to pick up, and like have counteracting arguments, pros and cons against each. I think it's fascinating. We're in such a fascinating world. What was it like to talk to somebody like that who has so much time speaking to like the world's experts on investment? Like that must have been an awesome conversation for you, no?
Yeah. So that was definitely memorable, because I've been following her work, for a while, because kind of like you said, right, she brings on the experts. She's not the expert, but she brings them on, and she tries to dive down with what are the most important trends, whether that it's within that week or that month or that quarter. And with her, it was really a fun interview, because obviously I want to hear about, her journey and how she got where she is today. And so, it was cool to hear about, she started in journalism, and then through there, she then ended up becoming part of Kitco News, which was, one of the tops, metals investment kind of platforms, to kind of learn about from the best to learn from the best investors in the space. And then from there, she came to Stansberry. But so many of the people that she's interviewed and sat down with, right, from Rick Rule to, like the list goes on, right, of these top world-class, investors, billionaires, pretty cool stuff. Like even Mark Cuban, right? So it was cool to hear about, some of those background discussions, like kind of stuff that you don't get to hear on air and off air, or what she thinks, after interviewing all these people, what are the common things of, a good investor to a great investor, right? And how do we make that shift, right? Right. So with her, it was really cool because she's just such a humble woman, hardworking woman, and has met some really incredible people in the finance world.
Mm-hmm. So why then do you have the investment side in your podcast? Like, what's the interest? What's the interest to convey that as part of like your living your greatness mantra? Why is that important?
Yeah, I think it's important because I'm a strong believer when we think about our overall wellness, right? There's many dimensions, right? So an athlete, for example, an Olympian can be physically well, right? They look good. They perform well, right? Physically, but maybe they might be missing areas, in terms of their sleep or their nutrition, things that you can't see right underneath like the surface. Mm-hmm. But that's physical wellness is only one dimension of many, right? So you also have your social wellness, right? Your community, your family, your entrepreneur tribe, right? You have your emotional wellness, right? We could have great physical wellness and even social wellness, but you want to make sure that you're grounded. You want to make sure that you're stable. You want to make sure that you are emotionally in control, right? Again, you could still have bad days, but how do you manage those emotions, right? And then, so anyways, to answer your question, financial wellness is super important, because that is related. That's another key area in our wellness dimensions. So lately I felt, especially with the times that we're going through right now and, the pandemic and all these other aspects, I found it was more important than ever to make sure that I have a lot of financial experts coming on the show, because that can affect people's, confidence, their, insecurities, in terms of, how to provide for themselves. Right. And so, yeah, so that was kind of one reason why I felt financial wellness would be important to have on the show.
Yeah, that's really cool. Cause yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the Maslow's pyramid of needs, like if you're not okay financially, right, there's a whole cascade of things that just don't go well for you, right? Because you're constantly trying to figure out, well, where am I going to get my next buck, which translates into, well, where am I going to eat? Where am I going to live? Am I going to have a roof over my head? Like these are serious concerns. And then let's say things are okay, but long term, what are your projections looking like? Like, are you going to be able to live well in your 60s, 70s, 80s when you can't work anymore? These are really serious questions that I think a lot of people, like, they just kick the can down the road. It's like, no, man, like you got to figure this shit out. Like, especially if you're in your 20s, like that's my biggest wish for my kids, that I can convey what I just learned like 4 years ago about looking after my financial health. Like, I was just kind of abdicating it to like the banks. I was just like, I guess I'll know what to do. Like, I don't know. Like I was just making a salary and hoping things went well. Right. I didn't take it seriously because I didn't understand the seriousness of it. And I was scared of the whole world of investing. And that was my biggest hindrance, right? It was just that fear of, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to lose money. And if I lose money, I'll be a loser. And it was just that negative self-talk, right? Because I didn't know what I didn't know until I started listening to things. And so it's cool that you have that aspect of your podcast, because it demystifies the scary part of that whole aspect of life, right? Which is money, because we don't typically like to talk about it. And the other cool thing is, like, you're like 2 degrees of separation away from like some of the biggest billionaires on the planet. You've talked to her and she's talked to these people. Yeah. That's wild. Like, that's the coolest thing about podcasting. Is like, it puts you so much closer to the individual that is like way up here that normally you wouldn't have any access to. But like, she's got that wealth of information. You talk to her, you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, it's just very interesting space to be in, a very interesting time to live in, because we have that ability to communicate with those people. So I love that part of your podcast. The other side is like the athlete side. Like, you've had, and you mentioned before, like your roommate, who was Pat Vellner, who was 3-time podium finisher in the CrossFit Games. Clearly, if not the fittest man in Canada, close to the fittest man on the planet numerous times. What was it like talking to him? Like, obviously you know him well, like your buddies, but like having that as like a frame of reference for high end performance, what's that been like for you moving forward, and like getting a like perspective on high, like you were at a high level and he was just like at another high level. And obviously he's a busy professional as well. Like, what did you glean from him and his experiences as a high level athlete and I believe athletic therapist as well? So like just living a normal life as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is, again, it goes with like the theme. I'm trying to show people that all these people are human, they all have a story of where they started and how they got there. And that's why, like, now it's funny with time, I've kind of realized that my podcast is not just about inspiring people, to enhance their overall health and wellness. It's more than that. It's how do I break down the best of how these people achieved what they achieved? You know what I mean? So how do I break down how they got there? So to answer your question with Pat, it was more, something with him, as a friend, as a roommate, as a classmate, all that stuff. His habits were incredible. His discipline was incredible. His work ethic, talk about a whole another level, right? So these are all good qualities of habits to have, if you're not only becoming, a CrossFitter, if that's what you want to become, but same thing if you're trying to become a writer, right? You gotta make sure that you get out your writing, that you practice, you fail, right? You have to have some articles where you suck, right? Discipline, right?
Lots of really, articles where you suck. Yeah.
Yeah. Discipline too, right? Like, it's not easy, to get in a headspace for a couple hours, but the more you develop these routines, these habits, you start to experience like the ebb flow, right? And then you start to see like, it's not that hard. It just comes with practice. Right. And so there's a lot of like neuroscience behind it, like neuroplasticity and how we're able to, if we have a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, just with time, you just get better and better at it. Right. And it becomes part of your lifestyle. So with him, it was just really fun. Like, those were things I already knew because I was, a friend of his, a classmate of him. I had seen him demonstrate it to me, and other people. So it was fun to share that, and as well as talk about stories, of where, he's competing and his bike, breaks because of a crash. Right. And again, like, you were complimenting him, on his successes of podium finishes, but there was also a lot of, curves and downsides and, how did he overcome that? And how did he keep moving forward? Right. And then other things that I think that was fun in that interview was, talking about things I think he wasn't always asked. Right. So what is his definition of greatness? What is his, thought process of, going from a good to great athlete? And then because I knew he had such great habits, hearing a bit about that and his opinion. Right. So yeah, it was a lot of fun sitting down and kind of chatting with him about that.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm fascinated by high end people now too. Right. Like, I guess I always kind of was, but I just didn't have a medium to figure out how to actually talk to them. I was always fascinated by Michael Jordan. I had a poster of him when I was a kid, loved playing basketball, and the information was sparse, right? In the 90s, like you had to like get a book, maybe see a documentary on TV. And I remember reading in the BHS library about Michael Jordan and his routine before a game. And the reason why he was the best is that, is that whole concept of like, you got to take, 10,000 shots and like miss basically like a million of them, right? Like you keep on shooting and you miss. It's like, but you scored X amount of baskets, right? Like he was just a point machine, but it's because he practiced so much. And before he would get even onto the court, like he was visualizing his whole game. Like he was in that headspace where he was like, no, man, I'm focused. I'm doing all the moves. I'm doing my crossovers. Like I'm doing them in my head before I even step on the court. And that separated him from everybody else. And now it's just kind of, I don't know if it's like the norm, but he set the bar at the next level because of his preparation, because of his habits, because of his ability to, before he even stepped on the court, he was like thoroughly ready and dialed in. His fitness was dialed in. Everything was dialed in. He always fascinated me on that front. And now there just seems to be because of the access to information to all these like different athletes, we can kind of glean that, the ones that are at the top of their game all more or less have the same kind of not only work ethic, but they have that consistency with their habits that they don't miss stuff. They just keep on doing it and they do it again and they mess up and they do it again and they constantly get better. It's just fascinating to see how if you put the time in at the right thing on the right things, you will eventually achieve a level of success that's greater than what you have now, which is really cool. And I think that's what your podcast is, helping achieve is, people are listening, you're learning. And in the meantime of, talking to people and everybody's kind of upskilling just a little bit. And it's very interesting to say the least. And then there's another guest I just want to touch base on. Like, you talked to Dick Irvin. They're just really cool. Like, I for those Americans that are listening, Dick Irvin's just like a hockey legend here, not on the playing side, really, but although he did play, he was massive in just like I guess you want to call it the golden age of hockey here, and being a commentator for the Montreal Canadiens, his dad being the coach for the Montreal Canadiens. Like, he was just like the guy when it comes to hockey here in Montreal, and like his voice is iconic here. What was it like talking to such a hockey legend on your podcast? Like, that's huge, man. Well done for landing him too.
Yeah. No, it was super cool to connect with Dick, because he's been living in the West Island, which is where you and I are from, for a while now, right? So he's in Point Claire, and he's got nephews and family, and so it was pretty cool, the story of how I got him on. Actually, it was actually thanks to my brother Eric, who actually works at IGA, and he sees Dick every week, coming in and getting groceries, and they have a relationship. So my brother Eric was always telling me, hey, you got to get, some hockey legends on soon. And then one day he's like, hey, here's Dick Irvin's number. And that was really cool, because Dave, you could probably relate, but you're always thinking about, okay, who is like your next guest? Something that I was sharing even with my father, like the other day, like, it's beautiful, the entrepreneur journey, the highs, the lows, but you do feel alone a lot too, even though that's not like, you're not looking for validation or anything. It's more, right, you're passionate, some of the things that we discussed earlier. But it is pretty cool when something like that happens, where maybe you put in good work and then someone reaches out to you, and you get an opportunity. Or in this situation here, where my brother Eric literally did all the work for me. All I had to do was, call Dick and introduce who I was and what my mission is and my podcast. And then obviously, I had to put in the work, to prepare and kind of make sure that I was ready, and then have the conversation, and then, obviously edit it. But with Dick, it was really cool, because I wanted that episode obviously to celebrate, he's written some big books, on all the hockey stories of, his father or becoming a great coach, or, the Habs, he's done a lot, like not just on broadcasting, but even documenting a lot of history, in the hockey world. So with him, I wanted to celebrate that, because that's definitely something, that he's known for. And also to hear, how he got into that whole world, which obviously his father was part of it, but as well as himself, playing at McGill, high level hockey. And then also just his passion, right? Because he started Hockey Night in Canada, right? So that was something that he started, right, on CBC. If anyone knows that.
I didn't know he started. I didn't know he helped start it.
He was one of the ones. I don't think he was the only one, but he helped start that, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
So for me, it was like kind of like the theme that I keep saying here was, yeah, it's amazing, all those successes and those stories, but then to also show the other side of him, which is, he's just a person with two legs, two arms. But I think what was really fun was to hear those stories, and to hear also, after all the players that he has watched, what does he think separates a good player from a great player? And what is his definition of greatness? And what is his thoughts on, a great coach instead of a good coach, right? Because it's really easy in anything we do to get good at something, right? But the hard part where we stand out is to get great at something, right? So if you think about any world-class person, right? And you already spoke about Michael Jordan, right? There was so many other NBA players that were really good. So what are all the things that you have to do, right, to get better? So it was really cool to get his opinion on that, and just celebrate his stories, right? And then the last thing was get some wisdom from him, right? Because he is now, I think, either 91 or 92 years old. So he was my eldest guest. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool that even though he's, in his 90s, he's still kicking ass. Like, he's clearly going out doing his groceries. He's doing podcasts. Like, that's, like, That's cool, man. I hope to still be like hip with the kids in my 90s, whatever that is. I doubt it's going to be podcasting. Maybe it's going to be some like neural link, like, oh, how do I attach this thing to my brain, But
Right.
that's neither here nor there, but to hopefully pass down some wisdom, which is really cool. So, Ben, what's the big message that you would like to share or convey to obviously the listeners here are mostly military veterans, young and I'm not going to say old, I'm going to say like maybe a little bit grizzled, like mid 30s 40s. A lot of us are in the middle of transitioning out of the military. A lot of us have some great ideas, but we're not quite sure how to kind of get there, and we want to still be of service. What would you say, like, where do you start, man? Like, we talked a lot about habits, and we talked a lot about, conveying your message and practicing and getting things started. What would you say would be like one of the best things to do as a veteran, kind of looking at getting something started, whether it's a blog, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a business, doesn't matter. What would you say is the first thing that somebody should do in order to get that off the ground?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind, I learned it from probably one of my greatest mentors, Clifford Berry, who coached me when I was the captain of the John Abbott swim team. And he was the one that coached Victor Davis, who was almost like the Michael Phelps of Canada in breaststroke. And he has a message to athletes, to coaches, and it's follow your heart. And so there's a lot that you could break down with that. And it's to have the courage just to do it, to start, to fail, to succeed, to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Putting yourself out there, right? Where, a lot of people are now seeing, another side of you, but really it's your authentic self, right? If you strongly believe in that. So I think if you're always having this awareness, right? And I had shared with everyone earlier on that I had awareness, probably at least a decade ago of wanting to do what I'm doing now. You just have to start. And once you keep going, you have to enjoy the journey. You got to embrace it. You got to know that, there's days you're going to feel alone. There's days where you're going to feel awe, from the success of, if it's a podcast, for example, like someone that you've had on your show that you never thought was possible and now it's happening. So I think the biggest thing is to follow your heart and to have the courage to just do it, just start. And you're going to have a lot of like so many learnings. Like I know Dave and I have spoken about this, like in our, first couple months, and then let's say first half year, you're going to have so many learning experiences because, you're navigating this compass without being told what to do. Right. So, something, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of like, this is you, like you are creating this vision. So to really enjoy that and to embrace it and to not be scared as you get started, to reach out to like-minded people. Cause it's really easy if we feel alone, to give up on a great idea. So to also build that support, I think is also important.
Right. I like that you use the compass analogy. All of us in the infantry know exactly what it's like to follow a compass and also get lost while following a compass. And I think that tends to be one of the things that military service at least kind of trains us to do. Like, we always have a plan. We're always following a plan. There's always a plan. What's the plan? And then when you're out and you're trying to do something on your own, it's like, well, no, there's nobody telling you what the plan is. You're creating the plan from scratch. Like, it is all you, bro. So that is exciting and terrifying at the same time. So, following your heart and doing what you think is right and what needs to get done is so important, because it'll just act as that compass, like you said. Like, it'll guide you in the right direction, and being able to accept that, and that first iteration may not work. It may not be what you like, and be like, I didn't really like that. But now you learned that you didn't like that one thing. So try a new way of doing it, try something else, but to keep on trying to plug away at it is key. So that's awesome message to convey for sure. Now, where do people go and find your podcast so they can listen to the awesome guests you got on there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. many spots. Like if you're a Spotify fan, you can find it there. If you're into, Amazon Music, you can find it there, Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, YouTube. So those are really like the 5 main platforms where you can find it. And then I will be having, I'm hoping in like the next month, like my website is being launched. So then that will have everything connected. Nice. That will have all my Medium articles there, my newsletter. So a lot more.
You got a newsletter? Dude, I didn't know you had a newsletter.
So my newsletter, I've written a couple. That was, I think, a year ago. And then I put it on hold because I wanted to really stay focused on my writing as well as the podcast. But in the next month from now, I'm going to be launching my website where it will be a monthly newsletter to get more wisdom and kind of thoughts.
Nice. I like it. So all major podcast apps, Living Your Greatness podcast, and Medium. Is it Living Your Greatness blog on Medium? How do we find you there? Yeah,
no, it'd be Ben Mumme, or actually might be Benjamin Mumme. And then other spots where you can find me, if you look up on Instagram, Ben Mumme, like I'll be there, also Living Your Greatness. Right. So, I have my individual platform, and then I obviously have like Living Your Greatness. So really anything that you Google Living Your Greatness, it will come up. And feel free to join whichever one. And like I said, now I'm taking all those platforms and putting it to one central spot.
Beauty. Love it. Awesome. Ben, thanks so much for chatting with me and for sharing your journey so far and continued success moving forward, man. It's really cool to see the progress you made and the consistency of your content and what you're putting out there. And it's cool to be in the game together, man.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dave. And Dave, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and kind of share my story. And your story is always evolving, always changing, right? So again, that's kind of what I was saying before. You got to embrace the process, embrace like the journey, do it for the right reasons. And I also want to share too, at the end of this episode, it's been really cool to witness as a family friend, as a brother, just kind of seeing, your journey and seeing how it's developed. And I still remember before, you even had your website, you even had any episodes out, any blogs out. I still remember that very, I would say, meaningful, thoughtful chat that we had at Ye Olde Orchard Pub. And that was literally, that was literally like 3-4 years ago. So it's been so cool to see, once you get started, once you tackle all these hurdles and just give it your best shot and follow your heart, right? It's just crazy where you could go. And, it's to the point where even I have, as I mentioned, I teach physical education primary at a college, but I have 2 classes, and one is physical skills for paramedics, and another one is for police tech. And I had a couple of my students bring up that they actually have your program and they follow it. So I want to add that.
Really?
Yeah, it happened last week, and I was like, I have to share that on the episode with Dave. So it just shows the listeners, Dave followed his heart, but not only that, there's a lot of really cool experiences that could come and develop over time.
Amazing. Yeah. You never know who your audience, you never know who's really listening, and you never know who's kind of like getting better just by virtue of the people that you're able to bring onto your platform. And that's kind of the coolest thing about what we're doing here, at least for me anyways, is like the amount of impact you can have on a massive scale just gets bigger every time you have a new episode and a new podcast guest. And that's the power of this platform. So I'm really humbled to be on here, and I'm really humbled to have you here on the podcast and saying all those kind words, man. I'm not good at taking compliments, as you can see. So we're going to sign off and leave it at that. So thanks again, buddy. And folks, if you're listening, train hard, fight easy. Peace.